Hello, you're listening to Politics Uncensored with me, Ali Milani.
And me, Zoe Grunewald.
Coming up on the show, we'll be speaking to Anastasia Kucher, a Ukrainian journalist based in Dnipro, who's just returned from the country reporting from for the European Correspondent. After this, we'll be chatting to Anna Sabine, the Lib Dem MP for Frome and East Somerset, about the party's place in an increasingly extreme political landscape and their recommitment to the pensions triple lock.
And as always, you can find us at Politics Uncensored on social media. All that and more coming up later in the programme. But first, it's the week unwrapped. Far-right activist Tommy Robinson is charging £28 a minute for his expert consulting in combating the Islam invasion of Britain. His words, not mine.
Did you say that Islam like that on purpose?
Well, Ali, I thought you'd have some thoughts on this. How is the invasion going?
It's pretty well, to be honest. We're doing quite well in the southern regions.
Nice.
Struggling in the north and in the east, ironically enough. I did check the Islam WhatsApp group earlier today.
Oh, yeah, nice.
And the reports coming is everything's going well.
Okay, fantastic. Well, look, all jokes aside.
Why?
Why, yes. I mean, it is ridiculous, isn't it? £28 a minute. Right.
Is it £28 a minute?
That is insane. I also want to know I really would like to know what it is he's suggesting people do about it that isn't just descending into far-right thuggery. Like, do you think he actually has any specific ideas?
No, so what I assume this is like you pay to be brainwashed on how evil Muslims are and how evil Islam is and how everyone's coming to take over the country. I assume it's a sort of how the top arguments for combating, I guess, non-racist people. And 28 minutes. One of the things I wonder is how he landed on the £28 a minute.
Yeah, because you can't put a price on Tommy Robinson's advice, can you?
No, for sure. I mean, as experts in combating the Islam invasion, I think it means Islamic invasion.
What would you, Ali, I mean, what would you suggest if someone came to you and said, how do I combat the Islam invasion of Britain? What advice would you give?
It's a very good one, to be honest. Perhaps lining the beaches with pigs, because we're afraid of pigs. I don't know if you've seen.
Okay.
By the way, I always find that remarkable. Obviously, it's horrific that people go around in mosques and Muslim community centres and put bacon in. What do you think? Do you think it burns our skin to touch bacon?
It's funny because my granddad was Jewish,
right, and
he loved bacon. His
really?
favourite thing was a bacon sandwich. We used to have bacon all the time at his, and the smell of bacon reminds me of my Jewish grandfather.
So did I. I loved bacon because I haven't always been Muslim.
Okay, so you're wrong. The pig thing wouldn't even work.
Well, they think. So I'm trying to give them advice on different methods that would work. Or you could just put out Rupert Lowe with binoculars on the.
I know you're still baiting him. You really want him to respond. He will eventually.
Look, on a serious level, I think we are reaching a serious sort of inflection point with the level of Islamophobia in the country, because it's I don't know, maybe it's just my feed, but everything right now seems to be like the Muslims are invading, the Muslims want to change our culture, and
I want to tell you that you need to get off X. I think I've told you that before, but actually,
I think so. It's horrible.
But you know what I've realised? I'm missing probably really how vicious this stuff is getting.
Yeah.
Because you could just say, well, if it's just on X, it's contained, but clearly it isn't contained. This stuff is spilling over. I'm sure we're going to talk about it later in the programme, but maybe for your own sanity, you need to get off X.
Didn't he just get done for or arrested for punching someone at a train station? And then he flew out to I think Spain it was.
Yes.
And then he was arrested on re-entry.
There was definitely some images floating around of a man who on his front, looking like he'd just been punched, and Tommy Robinson in the vicinity. But look, all jokes aside, we also have to acknowledge how serious a threat this man can pose, because in The Guardian this week, this poor man whose surname is Ayini, he's a musician from Redcar in North Yorkshire. He was racially abused and falsely labelled a paedophile in the week because a family video of his was stolen from the TikTok account of his wife, Natalie, whom he married 5 years ago, and shared by extremists online. Ayini, we should say, is a black man, and he has white granddaughters. So you can imagine the sort of stuff that was coming out that had been, all this disinformation on X about this man and his grandchildren. Ayini and his wife have been scared to leave the house because of threats. His wife said, "We haven't gone outside at home. We just can't." Just after it started to go viral, someone in the local pub recognised him immediately, and we couldn't believe how quick it had spread. We were walking home from shops just streets from our house, and 2 lads passed us, spun round and said, "I hope you're not them off that video, or we're coming back to slash you up." I mean, it's just horrendous.
Yeah, and when you look at the individual instances like this, I think it really should give politicians, mainstream politicians, sort of a pause into how much they are fueling. You don't have to be a supporter of Tommy Robinson to be feeding into the ecosystem that makes him popular. So people like Robert Jenrick, Nigel Farage, Suella Braverman, who went to a anti-migrant or protest this week or whatever. I'm not saying they are supporters of Tommy Robinson, which they aren't, because even people like Nigel Farage have publicly stated their opposition to him. But their anti-immigration rhetoric and their divisive rhetoric feeds into an ecosystem which makes Tommy Robinson popular. And I think what's happened is people don't have to openly endorse the extreme far right, people like Tommy Robinson, in order to set the grounds for people like him to become popular. And so I definitely hold people like Robert Jenrick, Suella Braverman, Nigel Farage, Rupert Lowe, and Kemi Badenoch responsible for the environment that we're in, that causes things like this. So people like Tommy Robinson typically come out of these environments. And by the way, Keir Starmer as well, with his Island of Strangers speeches. These are all, I think politicians really need to reflect on culturally, where are we pushing society and what's the end point of this?
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we move on, I should say that someone did pose as a supporter of Tommy Robinson, whose real name, of course, is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, and asked for advice on protesting and anti-Islam activities as per his services. Robinson, whose real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, as I said, replied and said, "Get active, son. Find some confidence. Maybe investigate the mosques. All these sorts of things, bruv. Look at the funding. Start doing videos talking about it."
You just can't put money on that, bruv.
No, that is some
How much money
advice,
has he made?
Bruv. He's made £9,194 from his videos.
Zoe, I could maybe, come on, like, now you're being silly. I could do that.
I feel like we're in the wrong industry.
I could be an Islam consultant for £28.
Yeah, you could. I mean, that advice you gave us earlier was just absolutely priceless.
Live coaching calls, £390 for 15 minutes.
Oh, live coaching. We can talk about that in another episode, but it is...
Live coaching by Tommy Robinson, your confidence has to be extremely low.
Oh, indeed. Okay, well, moving on. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is considering cutting the tax-free pension lump sum, as reported by The Telegraph, in a move that could raise more than £2 billion a year. Ali, we know that the government's winter fuel allowance policy went pretty abysmally. What are your thoughts about this? And it hasn't just been this, but there's been a few things this week that are potentially targeting wealthy older people. There was some discussion about the triple lock, which I now believe they say is safe, which I have views on. And also a raid on the scale of high value homes. Again, this is all stuff that's been thrown out.
Like a mansion tax, yeah.
What do you think?
So here's where we are. It seems as though the government have landed on the numbers aren't adding up and there needs to be tax rises. So we're not going to be able to cut our way out of this alone. Which
is good.
Which is definitely...
We like that.
I mean, we should... It was always the case, right? And it was definitely the case that the way out of the financial difficulties we were in was always going to be tax rises. The question is on who. And it seems like a lot of these things are being leaked to set the scene for tax rises in the autumn. I think that's unavoidable. And what we're hearing is, so I had heard the mansion tax, the sort of high valued properties tax, which I expect will come in. I'd be surprised if they touch pensions, given the bruises that they took over the winter fuels, and actually the political experience from Number 10 now, a year into government, will have been the most damaging thing was going after older people and their pockets. So I'd be surprised if they do that at all. There has been polling done to show that a wealth tax is widely popular, not just amongst Labour members, but the country as well, although a plurality, not a majority. But I don't think that that's the way that they're going. It looks like the conversation so far is on high-valued properties and on the pension lump sum.
So the pension lump sum, so at present, pensioners are allowed to withdraw as much as 25% of their pot tax-free upon retirement. We should say neither of us have any idea really about this because we're not pensioners. And the idea of us getting any kind of pension seems fanciful to me.
Unlikely, yeah.
So, but perhaps listeners, you knew that pensioners are allowed to withdraw as much as 25% of their pot tax-free upon retirement up to a cap of £268,000. Reducing this cap would allow the Treasury to raise billions of pounds a year. The Treasury did not deny that a change would be considered, though one Whitehall official cautioned that the Chancellor was not prioritising pensions reforms and said they thought it would be unlikely. Now, obviously, the elephant in the room, Ali, is the rising cost of pensions. So at the minute, the state pension is risen pretty steadily over the past 8 decades, from around 2% of the UK economy to about 5%. So it costs about £138 billion. It's now forecast to increase to 7.7% of the economy by the early 2070s. This is obviously because of the triple lock, but also the growing number of people above the state pension age. So that is people, this ageing population. The key point is that there's been earnings volatility over the last 2 decades, and the triple lock, when it was brought in, it wasn't really anticipated that it would exceed expectations quite so much. So as we know, the triple lock is 2.5%. It goes up with 2.5% inflation or wages, whichever's highest. Basically, because we have a dwindling tax base of young people who are paying more in taxes, have less money to go around, and we have an older population that's living longer, we can't really afford it. It's only increasing in value. But no government wants to touch the triple up because it's political suicide, because pensioners are the largest voting bloc. They're never going to, it's like turkeys voting for Christmas. They're never going to vote for a party that says we're going to tax you more on your pension or end the triple lock or take money away from you. But at the same time, we do, pensioner poverty was a huge issue not that long ago, 2 decades ago. But because of the policies implemented by the previous Labour government and the Conservative government, pensioners have been lifted out of poverty. And of course, there is still inequality in there, but actually you're more likely to be a millionaire as a pensioner than you are to be in poverty. And our age group and the age groups below us are now poorer than their parents. So clearly we have huge intergenerational unfairness here. We need to do something about this, don't we? Yeah,
definitely. And I think you're right in that it's not going to happen, and that the frustration part is the political cost of this means it's unlikely that any political party really has the courage to touch it, because it is tantamount to political suicide. And Labour, even dancing around winter fuels, learnt its lesson that's something that you can't do. And it kind of brings into perspective this idea in moments of financial crisis that we're all in this together, because as we're seeing, I think inflation is up this week. We were just talking in the green room about the fact that the Tesco meal deal has gone up by 25p, I think it is.
No way.
Yeah, so it's now £4.25, which is an indication of the cost rises of food. But that cost will be spread out in multiple areas. The young will feel it, and others will feel it, but pensioners will be protected because there's such political cost. I'll give you an example. I saw a poll this week around bus fares and free bus passes. And it was this idea of giving free bus passes to 16 to 24-year-olds, I think it was. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. And the idea behind that was that it'll help boost the economy if young people can get around more. And the biggest opponents to that idea, do you want to guess who it was? Over 65s, who get free bus passes, by the way. And so it seems like we're also in a societal culture where people who have things or have received them on behalf of the state previously no longer want others to have them. That's from education to bus passes. So I don't think it's ever going to happen. I did want to touch on one other thing as it relates to taxes that we've spoken about before. Do we have time now? Or
go for it.
So we've previously spoken about, and we've had guests on the show talk about the exodus of rich people if we increase taxes, things like a wealth tax, and that we're already in the midst of millionaires and billionaires fleeing the UK because of the tax burden that exists. Lots of right-wingers have made this argument across the airwaves in Britain. It is not true. Right, the FT have done a comprehensive review as to whether it's true that there is an exodus of millionaires and billionaires fleeing the UK as a result of quote-unquote Rachel Reeves' tax grabs. They have been thoroughly debunked. There's the Tax Policy Associates and Henley and Partners have done a report which I'd really urge people to read, and it shows that the report from between 2023 and 2025, the millionaire count in Britain barely moved. And actually, it's the way that the data is obtained that's changed. So even this idea that if we increase taxes, the rich will leave and it'll hurt our economy, and that's the argument that right-wingers have been running with, has been thoroughly debunked.
Okie doke. Right, let's move on to our final story this week. So earlier in the week, Epping Council, of course, won their bid from the High Court to stop migrants being placed at the Bell Hotel in their area. And just today, new data revealed that the number of asylum seekers in hotels is up 8% in the past year, but has fallen slightly since March. Ali, let's talk about this High Court judgment first. I mean, in my view, this was entirely predictable, even though the Home Office were very surprised, in that perhaps the judgment, wasn't entirely predictable, although I do think from the sounds that there was a certain amount of arrogance about feeling like they didn't really need to turn up with the right evidence at the right time to make their case. But did the government not realise that if you ramp up anti-migrant rhetoric as part of your policy, you're going to have communities and council leaders turning on these kind of institutions housing migrants, and that is going to become a political problem? And now, of course, what's going to happen is all these other councils are going to be egged on by people like Kemi Badenoch, Nigel Farage, to make similar claims.
Which is already happening.
And then what are we going to have? A load of homeless asylum seekers? Well, no, we can't have that. We have a legal obligation to home them. So where are they going to go? Are they going to go in HMOs? Well, we have a rental crisis. What, they're going to go in housing with all that spare housing we have knocking around? They're going to go in barges. They're going to go in military camp. We've been through all of this. It doesn't work. This is so politically short-sighted by the government to think that something like this wouldn't happen. The only way you can deal with this is you need to speed up processing. You need to get people seen very, very quickly. You need to get their claims heard quickly. Also, give asylum seekers the right to work. Give them the right to earn their own money.
It's such an open goal. I don't understand.
We have labour shortages because of Brexit, because of COVID. You look at hospitality, you look at agriculture.
And all the evidence, by the way, suggests they want to work.
And they have expertise, they have credentials, they have all these things. We could match them to sectors that desperately need employed people, and then they wouldn't be relying on the state. And they don't get we've been through this, they don't get huge handouts by any means, but wouldn't that help? I mean, can I just, if you're super concerned, genuinely concerned, so if you're a racist, I'm not talking to you, but if you're genuinely concerned about migrants in your community or the increase in migration numbers and these people being housed in hotels, my question to you is genuinely, what is your solution to this problem? Whether you like it or not, the UK is a signatory to the international conventions on refugees and asylum seekers. So when people come and claim asylum, we have to judge their asylum claims on the merits that they are applied for. And there is a huge backlog by the way, which came from the Conservatives, hint, hint, Kemi Badenoch, that there's a huge backlog in asylum cases that haven't been assessed. In the meantime, these people are not allowed to work, right? So we can't not allow them to work and pay for rent and then also make them homeless. So I don't understand what people's solutions are. The only solution seems to be, if you want to take them off of taxpayer money, let them work. Absolutely. Well, I'm sure we'll be returning to this story. It doesn't look like it's going anywhere anytime soon. As we say, there are likely to be more legal challenges. But coming up after the break, we are going to be speaking to Anastasia Kucher, a Ukrainian journalist who has just returned from live reporting in Dnipro, Ukraine, to learn more about the Trump-Zelensky peace talks. That's next on Politics Uncensored.
Joining us now in the studio is Anna Kucher, a Ukrainian journalist for the European Correspondent, who's just returned from Ukraine, here to give us an update on the invasion as well as the Zelensky-Trump peace talks. Anna, thank you so much for being in the studio with us. You've just had some of the latest, breaking news about the situation in Ukraine. Do you want to give us what the latest news is?
Of course, thank you for having me. And the latest, now some media publish information that US plans to play not a huge role in Ukraine-Russia peace talks in the future and give more opportunities for Europe to play bigger role. So now President Trump also says that there will be a meeting with three of them only after President Zelensky and President Putin meet together. And there are no anything certain about whether this meeting will happen or not. President Putin suggested that there may be an escalation in teams that come to talk in the future, but he didn't actually mention that it will be him coming. And since we know from before, he mentioned that he will not meet with Zelensky because he is not a legitimate president, and he also said that maybe if such meeting will be held between Ukraine and Russia, someone else might go and meet with Zelensky. So that is something we will learn soon in the next couple of weeks, I think.
So Putin said that Zelensky isn't a legitimate president of Ukraine?
He mentioned that before, yes.
That's rich coming from him. So can I ask, you report from Dnipro, Ukraine, pretty regularly. And I think you're based from there. What's the situation like on the ground? Because I think some listeners might not understand what a country in war looks like, because we haven't been in war for a very long time, and at least on our own borders. What does that look like? What does every day look like on the ground in Dnipro, Ukraine?
In Dnipro, now the situation is difficult because the front line is moving from Donetsk region, which is the next region after Dnipropetrovsk region, and part of Dnipropetrovsk region is now also under attack. And when I go and report from the front line, I go through particular places, villages and smaller towns, and now some of these places are not really accessible because they are targeted and heavily attacked by Russian drones and other weapons. So it is very painful to see that places to which I went just a month ago or 2 months ago are not really places you can go and report from, but places from which people are now being evacuated, civilians.
Sorry. Can I ask, just more granular, are we talking about like lines of individual towns that are under Russian occupation and being resisted? Or is the risk in these small villages more airstrikes and drones and things like that? How much of it is soldiers on the ground? So when you go to the front line, there's literally a line of Russian soldiers versus Ukrainian soldiers, or is it more air warfare and drones and airstrikes and things like that?
I would say that it's a mixture. Now there are many drones which can be small, can be big. Sometimes bigger drones carry smaller drones, and they just wait for weaponry or soldiers to come to places, so then they can be attacked. Also, drones attack civilians at the same time when rockets and bombs arrive as well. So it is a combination, and in some places, of course, when it's a smaller place or a bigger place, when Russia comes closer and the Ukrainian army is still there defending it, there is also a collision of these two armies on the ground as well.
What is public opinion of Zelensky like right now? Because we know he's come under some scrutiny or some attack from part of the sort of MAGA US right for example, not holding elections during a wartime. And obviously he's had a real kind of diplomatic ups and downs with President Trump. But how is he being perceived at home?
I would say that every president can be better. And many people, of course, think that he can do better. Many people support him and believe in him, especially when he goes to have international meetings. That is time when he represents the whole country, and Ukrainians really believe in him when he goes somewhere to see someone who can make a decision about the whole country and people who suffer, and they support him. But of course, there are different opinions, and being a president is not an easy job, and many people understand it, especially if you're a president during the war, which is very hard, which is very long, and which affects so many people every day, and many people are exhausted. So of course they demand more and more because everyone wants the war to stop.
Something that the media over here, and I guess in the US, were obsessing over rather too much, really, in my opinion, was the row they had over Zelensky's suit when he visited the White House. Did that, was that something that the Ukrainian people cared about at all, or was there a feeling that it was, really besides the point when it comes to what's actually happening in your country?
Exactly. Yeah. This is so not important, because I would say that it's very easy to be dissociated slightly or a lot when you're not on the ground and you do not see and don't feel how it is to be under the attack, what it means to know what is to be between two walls when there is an air raid, because that is the safest place in your flat or your house. And that is what people in Ukraine care about. They care about how to survive, how to go through every night and day and try not to be killed, and how to save those family members or friends who are in the army and trying to save the whole country. So people in Ukraine didn't care about the suit. This is the last thing they cared about.
What's the view on Trump? Because he's kind of wavered back and forth. He's not been the most reliable partner for Ukraine, even though he has approved some military support and aid to Ukraine. Some of the things he says about Putin are questionable. His treatment of Zelensky was questionable. But he is a really important security partner for Europe and for Ukraine. But, some of the things he's said about Ukraine and Zelensky and others has been questionable, to say the least. So what's people's view on Trump?
Many Ukrainians know, all of them, I would say, who understand at least a bit about politics, that he is a very important figure, and many things depend on him. And many people want to believe that he will be brave, that he will be decisive, that he will support Ukraine and not withdraw his support, but only make it bigger, because this is very important, and Ukraine is the country that is under attack. So even with everything that is going on, I would say that people still want to believe in him and in his help, but sometimes when he is not supportive and he doesn't show this support, it damages many people in Ukraine. Those just ordinary people who don't know what waits for them and how tomorrow will look for them.
President Trump said that the US would give Ukraine very good protection, in his words, but he wasn't very specific about actually what this meant. And obviously one of the concerns, one of the sticking points, is whether that would mean boots on the ground and whether Russia would then see that as NATO, triggering Article 5 or NATO occupation in Ukraine. What is the view from Ukraine? Do you want to see boots on the ground there? Do you want the US's protection? Do you think it's necessary for keeping Russia back?
I think it is necessary, and involving other armies and bringing them to Ukrainian ground is actually something that may help Ukraine, because there are at the moment no real security settlements what can support Ukraine and help Ukraine to protect its peace for a long period of time. We see that Russia is not really interested in giving Ukraine this security. They talk about freezing some frontline parts. They talk about Ukraine never being part of NATO. They talk about Ukraine being neutral and just giving up some territories. So everything that can give Ukraine more support is something that Ukraine will take.
And is the view in Ukraine that Russia would come back for more?
Of course, they will.
Can I ask on that one of the big suggestions, even by Trump, has been land for peace, if that makes sense, and we've seen that not work in other parts of the world. Would that be something that the Ukrainian people would be able to, you think, on a large part, obviously there's different views in any country, would be able to stomach as a way to just stop the war and stop the killings, to give up certain sections of land in order to get peace and end the war, or no?
It is important to think about this in terms of the fact that Russia already had some parts of Ukraine for a very long period of time,
Crimea,
for years, Crimea and parts of Donetsk and Luhansk region, which is called Donbas. And they didn't stop, they only escalated. So many people in Ukraine know that if some territory will be given to Russia, they will use it as place to establish themselves, to prepare for the future, and if there
come back for more. Yeah.
Exactly. If there are no guarantees, they will come back for more.
Do you have an accurate or more accurate than we would sort of death and casualty count? How many on the Ukrainian side lives been lost?
This is not a publicly available information. This is not something that is shared. There have been some numbers published a long while ago. So I think we have the same information.
Because I think on the Russian side, we've seen anyway, it can be as high as 500,000 people.
Yes.
So that seems like a very, very high number to me. Whether it's true or not, I don't know.
And does Ukraine want to become part of NATO? I mean, you talked about this idea that Russia wants it to be neutral, in inverted commas. Is there a feeling from the Ukrainian people that it is time to join NATO?
Yes, I would say it is. If this can give some guarantees for Ukraine to be in peace, then of course that is something that is considered a good option.
And the level of support provided from Europe. So we've spoken about Trump, but our Prime Minister Keir Starmer has made it very clear that the UK under his premiership will always stand with Ukraine. What that looks like in reality is a question. How do people in Ukraine view the level of support that they've received from Europe itself, France, Germany, the UK?
Europe has been great support to Ukraine, and the UK supported Ukraine and still supports Ukraine every day in different capacity, of course. And now it looks like the EU and the UK all together will support Ukraine even more. And that is also something what I see US wants Europe to do, be more involved and take more responsibility. So for people in Ukraine, this means a lot. And all support is very necessary, because no matter how you look at Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine is a smaller country with less people. And if there is no support from Europe, when Ukraine is part of Europe and shares a lot with people in Europe, and also is this barrier between Russia and Europe, it's not going to be possible to end it without support from Europe.
And what's next then? We've had the talks. There's suggestion that there might be more. There's this question of a trilateral meeting. From your understanding, what happens next? What should listeners be listening out for? And what are going to be the key sticking points that are going to determine whether this ends in success or failure?
The key here is to keep an eye on Russia and see if they actually want to end this war. Even tonight, there have been attacks on Ukrainian cities and towns which are located far away from the front line in western part of Ukraine. And these actions speak louder than words. And we can see that there is nothing concrete which comes from the Russian side. So it is very important just listen to them and not to allow them to fool anyone, not Ukraine, not US, not Europe, but to listen and see what they do, and if they actually want to end this war or they just want to prolong it.
I have one last question. Obviously, in wartime, what tends to happen is military-aged, mostly men, but I assume women as well, are getting drafted into the front lines, especially as the front line starts to move. What kind of impact is that having on society and on the economy as more and more sort of young, able-bodied people are being drawn to the front line?
From what I know, many people who want to defend, they already joined the army and they're still doing it. Some people are being drafted. Some people avoid being drafted.
Yeah, because I've seen videos online, I don't know how true it is, but like young men being dragged from like nightclubs who should be serving, who have avoided and being taken to the front line. How much of that is true?
I haven't seen this one, but Ukraine is a country when a few hours from the front line, you can see that there is almost a normal life when there is no air raid going on. So this is like living on the edge when part of you is seeing this kind of normal life when you can go and have a coffee in a coffee shop. But a few hours from that point is an active front line, and there are more rockets and more drones.
Yeah. We hear this sometimes when we speak to people from conflict zones, that normal changes. So you can go to the shop or go to the nightclub, and then when the air raid gets off, you just go into your bunker and come back out. So is that what you've seen? Normal has changed in Ukraine?
Yes, definitely it changed. And during the day, there can be an air raid. But to return to your question, now I saw that there may be a change in the law which will allow younger men to leave the country, and maybe it will happen.
To leave the country?
Yes, to leave the country.
So right now they can't leave the country, or the previous law they couldn't leave the country?
Yes, they cannot. Yeah.
And I assume that's a way to stop an exodus and people who should be fighting leaving, I assume. Why is that law changed, do you know?
Maybe because those under 25 are not drafted to the army, so there may be a change. But what also changed is women started to do more jobs that before were dominated by men. So this is a change that is happening in society.
And the idea behind under 25s is you don't want to kill off your next generation. That's why you don't draft people under 25, I assume. Yeah.
Okay, Anna, thank you so much for joining us. That was Anastasia Kucher, Ukrainian journalist who has just returned from live reporting in Dnipro, Ukraine. Anna, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
After the break, we're going to be chatting with Lib Dem MP Anna Sabine about what the Lib Dems are up to, the triple lock, and much, much more. So stay with us and we'll see you then. Joining us now is Anna Sabine, the Liberal Democrat MP for Frome and East Somerset. Anna, thank you so much for joining us. It is a pleasure to have a real-life MP on the stream. We don't often get them, but we always love it when we do. So thank you for joining us.
Boris, great to be here. Nice to meet you.
So, Anna, we're obviously at a very interesting point in British politics where the right is growing, the far right is growing. The left are having its moment too, although perhaps a little slow on the uptake. And a YouGov poll has given the current government a minus 56-point approval rating, which is as low as the Tories before the last election. The Lib Dems obviously had their best election in recent history previously. And Ed Davey, I think, has got a pretty high or, relatively stable favourability rating amongst the public. But there is always that question about what exactly the Lib Dems are for. Where do you think your party sits now in this current political landscape?
I think we sit quite comfortably and in quite a nice position, really. I sit in the House of Parliament. I've been an MP for a year, and I look at the Conservatives to my right in disarray, and I look at the Labour benches opposite me looking very depressed at most of what's happening on the front benches. And I sit there with my 71 other colleagues, the biggest third party in 100 years, and I think we feel pretty positive. As you said, Ed's ratings have been pretty high and consistent. I think that's because he has got himself known to the electorate. I think he feels authentic. People know what he cares about. I think we've been challenging the government. We've been getting them to do various things like be tougher on water quality or free school meals and stuff that were our kind of policies that we've pushed on, and we're providing a constructive opposition. So I'm to a degree interested in what's happening on the left and the right, but frankly, I think we're just keeping on and being sensible and being a good opposition to this government, really.
Hi, Anna. Thanks for joining us. I have a question for you, but I need you to promise to be honest with me.
Okay.
A lot of the criticisms I hear about the Lib Dems are you're not actually interested in government, but being an opposition party that pushes government on certain issues. There's nothing wrong with that, I should say. Do you actually think that the Liberal Democrats in your lifetime could be in power and run the country and have a Liberal Prime Minister? Or do you see your role more as a third party, maybe an official opposition that pushes the quote-unquote bigger parties?
I think we're 3 or 4 years away from an election, and it's impossible to tell what might be going to happen. But of course, I think it's feasible. I wouldn't be here if I didn't think it was feasible that we could persuade enough people to elect us into government. But if you look at the political situation at the moment, the polls are all over the place, and the local elections showed that we didn't expect the success that reform had at local election level. And we're on a positive trajectory at the moment. So I would absolutely hope and expect that we will be in government at some point in my lifetime. I'm quite young still relative to most politicians, so hopefully I've got time to see that happen.
And another, sorry to keep throwing out criticisms we've heard about the Liberal Democrats, but another thing that people say is that actually the party is a little bit divided, because what you used to be kind of I guess some people would say a protest vote, had quite a strong foothold in rural constituencies. But increasingly now we have people turning away from Labour because they don't feel Labour is progressive enough, and moving towards the Lib Dems, because actually Ed Davey's party sits to the left of Labour on quite a few issues. And as you say, you've been quite vocal on things like social care, things like pensions, which often attract some of those left-wing voters. Is there, though, a growing row or identity crisis in the party between that kind of rural, slightly more, centre-right vote and the newer, younger, progressive voice that is joining the party? And how would you align those two groups?
Couple of things on that. Firstly, I'm not sure how helpful the left-right spectrum is these days when people are much more interested in issues than where they sit. In my parents' generation, you would have joined a political party, you'd have been active kind of more tribally. I look at my teenage kids, they're much more interested in issues. The left-right thing is interesting in terms of the party. I mean, I represent Frome and East Somerset, which is a fairly semi-rural constituency, and yet in the principal town of Frome, my residents are passionately concerned about what you might call more progressive, more to the left of Labour kind of issues. So I think it's a false dichotomy. And as a party, no, we're definitely not divided. If you look at what's happening with Labour and the Conservatives and the things they're dividing over at the moment, we're just pushing on with the issues we campaigned in the election and picking up new community-based issues as we go and doing our thing. I really don't think it's a kind of fair characterisation if people feel that we're divided. And actually, the thing about young people, I think more young people are coming over to us because they increasingly recognise that on lots of issues, whether it's kind of climate or proportional representation, we speak to a lot of the issues that they're interested in, but that's absolutely compatible with older members of the Lib Dems who've been campaigning on those issues for many years.
On these issues, I think you're right. People are much more issues focused than the traditional left-right. One of the major issues that you've voted on since you've been in Parliament for over a year now is the proscription of Palestine Action. Can I ask, why did you abstain from that vote? And given the fallout we've seen since, including over 500 people in a single protest being arrested for their alleged support of that prescription, it now seems unpoliceable. Do you regret abstaining? So why did you vote for it? Why did you abstain from the vote? And do you regret it since?
So just jumping back, I will answer that question. I mean, we opposed this legislation when it came through under the Conservative government in 2018. We were worried that it would restrict the right to protest and that it would lead to kind of excessive situations, as we've seen here, where people who are kind of peacefully protesting are being arrested in large numbers. On the specific issue of the vote, the government was very cynical. They wrapped up prescribing Palestine Action with two very extreme right-wing groups that we felt should be prescribed, and made it impossible for us to vote for prescription. But we were to vote against prescription. But we were very clear that we felt that while the group may meet the threshold for prescription, it would not be proportional to prescribe them. And since then, our Home Affairs spokesperson, Lisa Smart, has written to the Home Secretary and asked them to urgently review this legislation because we feel that the bar is too low for a group to be prescribed as a terrorist group. And what has happened, which is kind of people, many older people being arrested for holding up signs, is not acceptable, and it's an excessive use of the legislation.
That's a good answer. Thank you for answering that straightly. I've not had that in a while. Someone dancing around the question. Thanks.
I want to ask you about the triple lock, because this is something that's been in the news a lot this week, and the OBR is forecasting that the triple lock may go up to 7% of our GDP. Currently, it's costing, or it's to cost £15.5 billion a year by 2030. Many economists are saying it's simply unaffordable. The question is not whether we scrap the triple lock, but when. Are the Liberal Democrats playing politics on this? It will go, won't it? I mean, how can we still afford it?
We very proudly helped introduce the triple lock, and we're absolutely committed to keeping it. In this country, 1 in 6 pensioners are still living in poverty, and I talk to many pensioners worried about how they're going to manage when I do my casework and surgeries in my constituency. We also, as a percentage of GDP, spend less on pensions and state pensions than many comparable countries. So I think we're absolutely committed to keeping it, and we think that the solution to many of our financial woes at the moment is to grow the economy, not to be slashing things like pensions, winter fuel payments, whatever else it is.
So how would the Lib Dems grow the economy then?
We've talked about doing it in several ways. One would be to have a grown-up discussion about the benefits we had in a closer trading relationship with Europe, and the other parties seem determined not to mention the word Europe, but we're very keen to have that discussion and to look at a closer arrangements. I speak to and meet regularly with many businesses in my constituency who are really suffering as a result of the increases in employers' national insurance. I actually have a family member who's just been made redundant as a result of that tax increase. So the government are making a lot of decisions talking about growth, but not actually doing things that would encourage growth. In fact, the employer's NI is positively discouraging growth. So there's lots of different ways we can do that, but I think simply taking money away from pensioners isn't going to be the solution. The needs of those pensioners don't go anywhere. Those pensioners will increasingly rely on social care, the NHS and other things that cost money.
So what about means testing the state pension then? Therefore, you would target the poorest pensioners. You would make sure that they get potentially even more money in their pension. But the wealthy pensioners, and we do know that pensioners are increasingly wealthy, they're wealthier than the generations below them, that's for sure, wouldn't be in receipt of a state pension and they would still have their private pensions. Would that not be a feasible solution?
Assuming people have private pensions, I mean, there's an awful lot of people that are going into pension age relying on the state pension and not much else. I don't think that chipping away at the money that pensioners have is the solution. And also, once you start getting into means testing, it's incredibly complicated. You saw that with the winter fuel payment, where the government tries to row back and start to introduce an element of means testing, and it becomes really complicated. The solutions are much bigger scale, which to do things like have a discussion about going into a customs union with Europe, which would overnight massively increase the growth of the UK economy.
I don't disagree with you on Brexit.
And my last question to you, look, people like me, Muslim, sort of, my family were refugees to this country, are enormously concerned about Farage and the possibility of a reform government and what impacts that will have on our communities and our families. With that prospect, and the polls suggest that that's where we're headed, in your personal opinion, and I'm not asking you to sign off Liberal Democrat election strategy 3 years in advance, should all the big parties that oppose Farage's style of politics be talking about some sort of electoral alliance, a pact, whether formal or informal, to stop the very scary prospect of a Farage government? And how concerned are you about a reform government?
I'm concerned about the rise of reform, but what I would like the other two major parties to be doing is to start advocating for their own policies and stop trying to move to the right of Nigel Farage, which is only going to result in them being kind of not as right as Farage for Farage voters, but lose their own voters. It seems to me UK politics is kind of largely centred around what Nigel is or isn't doing, and the Liberal Democrats are the only party that's actually having the nerve to stand up to Farage and say that we think this kind of stuff is wrong and to call him out on a lot of his behaviour. So no, I don't want to see electoral pacts. I'd like to see proportional representation. I'd like people to, I think a lot of people's frustration, and this is a personal view with politics, is that they don't feel represented. Large numbers of people in this country vote for a party and never see themselves represented by that party.
I've got to tell you, I don't know if you'll know, I'm a member of the Labour Party. I think my suspicion is 2 years from now, if Labour is polling in the same sort of positions it is, you might get your PR going, because I think Labour will need to do it. You'll need a party in government that needs it.
Movement is really growing, and I think it's a great thing that it's growing. And I think, am I right? You'll know better than me whether the Labour Party membership have said they're pro
They've
this
passed
as well.
it at multiple conferences.
And my worry is that the rise of reform will be seen as a reason not to do it. But actually, until we can start getting people feeling that their vote links to some kind of result at the end of an election, you're going to get this growing discontent. I think it's one of the factors, and I feel really strongly that I'd like the parties to be doing something on that, not just kowtowing to Nigel Reform's views.
Thank you so much. That was Anna Sabine, the Liberal Democrat MP for Frome and East Somerset. Anna, thank you so much for joining us. That's it from Politics Uncensored today. Join us next Thursday at 5 p.m. where we unwrap the week's political talking points. You can stay up to date with the show by following at Politics Uncensored UK on social media, where you can find me at Ali Milani Live.
And you can find me at Zoe Grunewald.
If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back and catch up at FUBAR Radio or via the FUBAR Radio app.
Download it from your app store now.
Thanks for listening. See you next week for another episode of Politics Uncensored.